My brother found an old coil spring in a scrapyard and challenged me. He looked at it and asked, "Can you make something fantastic out of this?" At that exact moment, an idea flashed through my mind that gave me an instant rush of adrenaline. I immediately cut a small section from the coil spring and heated it in my forge. This time, I decided to use my gas forge. Once the steel was glowing hot, I started by straightening it. Then I began flattening it with my hammer until I had a steel plate about 5 millimeters thick. While it was still hot, I gave it a slight curve. After the steel cooled down, this was the rough shape I had. Next, I placed my design on the steel and started cutting out the shape with an angle grinder. Once the main profile was cut out, I decided to refine all the smaller details by hand with a file. I carefully corrected every section until the shape was exactly how I wanted it. Then I used the angle grinder to thin and level both sides of the blade. And this is what the rough blade looked like at this stage. Now came one of the most difficult parts of the entire project. I had to grind the bevels. Because of the unusual shape of this knife, I decided to make the bevels using an angle grinder instead of a belt grinder. This was extremely difficult and required a lot of precision. Working with an angle grinder made it even more challenging because one small mistake could ruin the entire blade. Once the bevels were finished, I refined everything one final time by hand with a file. Then I sanded the blade to 150 grit. After that, I heated it in the forge to approximately 850 degrees Celsius and quickly quenched it in oil. Now the steel was extremely hard and strong. I started sanding again from 150 grit and gradually worked my way all the way up to 2000 grit. Finally, I polished the blade until the entire surface had a beautiful mirror finish. Now it was time for the most exciting part, the handle. I decided to make things even more difficult for myself. Instead of making simple fittings, I wanted to cast both the front and rear handle pieces from solid brass. I carved the shapes from foam, placed them into sand molds, and poured molten brass into them. Once the brass castings had cooled, I carefully refined every detail. I sanded and polished them until they had a beautiful mirror-like finish. For the center section of the handle, I shaped a piece of wood and then wrapped it in leather. Finally, I assembled every piece together, and this is the finished knife. It looks like something straight out of a fantasy movie. What do you think? Will my brother be impressed?